What's the craziest flex you can think of? Is it a diamond-encrusted watch? A fancy house? A Cybertruck? How about the color blue? Let's talk about it. There's a great 3-episode BBC documentary that discusses art history using only 3 colors, white, gold, and blue. I'll put a link in the doobly-doo. The host discussed how the whiteness of ancient statues is a lie that comes from the fading and even outright removal of the original paint. He also discusses how gold, one of the most highly valued materials of all time, was cheapened by the process of electroplating, or gold plating as we know it today. But the episode about blue is the most interesting. The crux of the thesis is that the color blue, a really true blue, did not exist in artworks until the Renaissance artists discovered how to make ultramarine blue paint. And he's not wrong, at least from a certain point of view. After the fall of the Roman Empire, Western artists could not create a deep, vibrant blue paint to save their lives. It wasn't until the Venetian traders brought a precious stone from Afghanistan to Italy that artists were able to create the deepest blue paint, and that stone we know of as Lapis Lazuli. And to say that the artists of the Renaissance were the first to use this astonishingly deep blue color for art is not quite accurate. Yes, Western artists struggled to find the good blue pigment, and the Venetians' introduction of the lapis eventually allowed artists to create the wonderful blues in the frescoes that we love to this day. But lapis lazuli was used in ancient art for at least 4,000 years before this. Let's take a look at how lapis lazuli was used in ancient Mesopotamia. Lapis has been prized for millennia, with the earliest known mines dating back to the 7th century BCE. Almost all of the world's supply of lapis comes from Afghanistan. Small but significant amounts are also produced in mines in Russia and in the Andes Mountains in Chile. In Mesopotamia, brightness and luster were highly valued. Bright and shiny things were considered to be closer to the divine. Light and bright objects were prized because of their purity and the perception that the owner was closer to God. So why then is lapis, one of the darkest semi-precious stones, valued so highly in ancient Mesopotamia? Well, it's because it holds its shine better than most other materials. Interestingly, the word lapis may have been used as an adjective to represent dark and shiny. Lapis was so valuable that it would end up being one of the earliest trade goods on record. The Silk Road, which connected China and the Roman Empire, eventually forms along ancient lapis trade routes. Interestingly, again, the modern heavy rail route from China to Europe goes through Afghanistan and has the nickname of the Lapis Road. But I digress. One of the earliest examples of lapis being used in art outside of Egypt is a pre-Bronze Age Sumerian bearded bullhead. There's a mouthful. This cast copper bullhead is at least 5,000 years old, although the eyes may have been added later. The blue of the lapis contrasts dramatically with the green patina as it's depicted in this picture, but it would have been subtler when the copper was new and clean. Lapis was so valuable in Mesopotamia that the epic poem of Gilgamesh was supposedly written on tablets of it. Find the copper tablet box. Open of its locks of bronze. Undo the fastening of its secret's opening. Take and read out from the lapis tablet how Gilgamesh went through every hardship. A lapis-covered chariot was also gifted to Gilgamesh as a reward for his work. Of course, the poem itself was not preserved on lapis. That's not to say that lapis wasn't used as a tablet. Many wealthy Babylonians placed an inscribed tablet in the foundations of their houses as they were built. These were usually made out of clay or other hard substances and remained in the ground long after the buildings crumbled away. The very wealthy had foundation tablets made out of jasper, onyx, and, like this one depicted here, lapis lazuli. Now, if you wanted to keep up appearances but not spend as much money on materials, you could use fake lapis, or a stone that is painted with Egyptian blue. Now, Egyptian blue is a combination of calcium and copper. Let's talk about cylinder seals. Almost everyone in ancient Mesopotamia had a cylinder seal. They sort of functioned like a driver's license or a state ID do today. There were basically 4 uses for cylinder seals. The first one is signing a document or placing a mark on a clay tablet or a record of some type. The second is to seal a room with a piece of clay and then placing your mark on that clay so that no one could enter it without breaking the seal. The third is a ward or magic talisman. It could have religious significance or magical uses. And the fourth one is as a signet, which demonstrates your identity or your affiliations. Now, if you really wanted to flex in ancient Mesopotamia, you'd have a seal made out of lapis lazuli. These seals were small, cylindrical objects with a hollow center, which were carved in reverse and hung on strings. A seal was owned by one person and only used by that one person. And it was held by them alone, usually on a necklace or a bracelet. When a signature was required, the seal was taken out and rolled on the clay tablet before it was dry, leaving behind the impression of the images carved into it, the reversed impressions. These impressions consisted of cuneiform text, images, or both. This one you're looking at now shows a robed king who stands before the sun god Shemesh. The earliest known cylinder seals come from Syria and date back to the late Neolithic period. Cylinder seals were made by a seal cutter, known as a burugul in Sumerian and a perukulu in the Akkadian language. In the Handbook of Life in ancient Mesopotamia, Stephen Bertman describes the seal cutter's toolkit, which was found in the ruins of the ancient city of Uruk, Syria. In a clay jar were found a small copper chisel, 2 pointed copper gravers for detail, a whetstone, a borer for drilling holes, and some seals that had not yet been completed. The last work of art I want to discuss is the Standard of Ur. This is one of the most remarkable works of art found in ancient Mesopotamia. It was found in one of the graves in the royal cemetery at Ur, which is the birthplace of the biblical patriarch Abraham. There's not a consensus as to the function of the Standard of Ur. When it was uncovered in the 1920s, the archaeologist in charge, Leonard Woolley, thought that it was a war standard that was carried into battle on a pole like the Roman eagle. So it was cataloged as the Standard of Ur. More recent scholarship has proposed that it is the sound box of a musical instrument like a harp. The original wooden frame had disintegrated over time so that no one really knows what it was like. The two main panels were pressed together and crushed under the weight of the soil, which built up over the ages. Because of this, the object that's currently displayed is only the best guess as to what it originally looked like. Now, it's shaped like a trapezoid. The four sides depict different aspects of life in Ur. Let's have a closer look at the mosaic work here. As you can see, the shell, which is the softest material used, is carved into shapes to reflect the scene. The lapis is used in the background, and it was the most expensive component of this artwork. And you can see that the limestone there is cut into geometric shapes to form a border, and those are very small, and that's because the limestone is the hardest to carve. The standard of Ur is basically divided into panels, one depicting war and one depicting peace. The front panel is called the war panel and depicts several aspects of war. Woolley speculated that the panel would be displayed facing towards the enemy in battle. In the upper corner of the war side is the ruler's chariot. You can see that some of the lapis is missing because it was not available for the reconstruction. Below that is a scene showing the infantry, possibly making their standing in the hierarchy of society known. Like the war panel, this panel, which is called the peace panel, depicts the royal court at a banquet, along with other aspects of Ur life during peacetime. Woolley thought that this panel was displayed facing forward when the army marched home after victory, or if the forces were not interested in fighting and wanted peaceful passage. This detail here shows a seated officer at a banquet drinking from a cup. And there's also a lyre player there and a singer. Here's a detail of a seated ruler and that ruler's attendant. Below that is a depiction of shepherds bringing sheep and a bull in for the banquet. Now, in all honesty, Woolley's interpretation is hard to accept. While the standard of Ur does depict scenes of war, it probably wasn't carried into battle. For one thing, it was far too fragile for battle, and the images on it were too small to be meaningful at a distance. Another thing is that it's way too heavy. A wooden box covered with stones weighs way more than a Roman battle standard would, and it would have slowed down anyone trying to carry it. Although, could this be the source material of the Exodus? We know that the compilers of the Torah drew on the commonly known myths and stories of Mesopotamia. Probably not. What's more likely is that Woolley drew on the biblical story himself when he decided to assign a purpose to this work of art. Since the standard's been reconstructed from debris, we may never know what it was actually used for. It may have been a sound box for a harp, similar to the Queen's Lyre, that was found in the same tomb complex. Speaking of the Queen's Lyre, here it is. It is another reconstruction. It's made out of modern wooden parts, pegs, and strings, but the Lapis Lazuli shell and red limestone mosaic decorations, which are all set in bitumen, and the head, but not the horns, of this bull, are from the ancient world. They're from around 2600 BCE. The bull's head in front of the sound box is covered with gold. The eyes are made of lapis, and the shell and the hair and the beard are all lapis lazuli. A panel in the front depicts a lion-headed eagle between the gazelles. The bulls, which plants on hills, the bull man between leopards, and a lion attacking a bull. Edges of the sound box are decorated with inlay bands, 11 gold-headed pegs for the strings. It's clear that this blue stone was important to the ancient Mesopotamians. It denoted wealth, or flex as we like to say, and was really sought after and really valuable. I want you to think about how you use the color blue in your doodles. Does it represent wealth and power? Does it express some kind of emotion? It's time for your daily doodle. I want you to doodle using only the color blue. You can use any medium, and you can define blue in any way you want to. Try varying the tint, tone, and shade of the blues you're using. Remember, a doodle is a doodle. It can be messy or neat. It can stay in your sketchbook, or it can eventually become something great. There are no censors here when we doodle. And as always, keep drawing.